That night the rain fell as if the whole sky had burst open. Sheets of gray water hammered the stone-paved ground, drummed on the tiled roofs, and splashed into white froth that flickered in the dark. The wind howled, sweeping through the tall trees at the gate, shaking their branches like giant hands thrashing in despair. The damp air was heavy, cold enough that every breath turned into mist. Amid the storm, right in front of the black iron gate of a grand mansion, a small figure huddled like a lost leaf. It was a black girl, around 10 years old, so thin that even a tattered raincoat could not shield her. Her natural curls clung wet to her forehead, plastered by the downpour. She wore only a thin t-shirt, soaked and clinging to her skin, streaked with mud, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach, as though holding in the gnawing hunger that bit from within. Her frail shoulders shook, her bare feet bluish from the cold, standing in a puddle of rain. Beside her, under the shadow of the gate, stood a wooden doghouse. Its roof was stained and weather-beaten, its planks slick with rain. Inside, it was empty, and that bleak little shelter was the only place the girl's eyes clung to, her last hope for refuge. The mansion belonged to Alexander Grant, 55, a white billionaire whose name carried both awe and dread in business circles. They called him the Cold Shark, a man ruthless in deals, merciless to rivals, and never known to let pity creep into his decisions. He was tall, his features sharp, his gray-blue eyes so piercing they made people feel stripped bare. His world was enclosed behind iron gates, a fortress where no stranger belonged. The girl lingered before the gate, small hands clutching the frozen iron bars. It took her a long time before she could gather enough courage to speak, her voice no louder than a trembling whisper, nearly swallowed by the storm.
"Can I sleep there?"
Her words broke apart, fragile as the cry of a fledgling lost in the storm. The heavy wooden door of the mansion suddenly creaked open. A warm beam of light spilled across the rain. In the doorway stood a man, Alexander Grant, a glass of red wine in hand. Posture erect, his gaze cold as steel. He said nothing, only stared at the child. Lily, that was her name, didn't dare look up. Her eyes flicked from the doghouse to the man, filled with unease. Her lips, blue from the cold, trembled, but no further words came. Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us. The moment stretched long, broken only by the pounding rain. Alexander raised his glass and took a sip, his gaze never leaving her. Then, with a faint nod, he lifted his hand. His finger pointed to the wooden doghouse. Lily flinched. Then, as if released, she scrambled inside without a word. She curled into the damp, cramped space, as obedient and silent as a stray pup. Alexander stood there, wineglass in hand, eyes sharp with suspicion. In the flash of lightning, his face looked like it had been carved from steel. Questions rippled through his mind. Who was this child? Was she putting on an act to provoke pity, or had someone planted her here as a pawn? He drank again, silently watching. The way she folded herself, the unquestioning compliance when he pointed her to a doghouse. It was all unnatural. Alexander narrowed his eyes, studying her as if he could pierce through to her very soul. Let's see how long you can keep up this act, he thought, his stare unblinking, hard as ice. The next morning the sky cleared, but the scent of last night's storm still lingered on the leaves and damp stone paths of the estate. On the lawn, raindrops shimmered in the early sun like tiny beads of glass. Yet none of that beauty touched the wooden doghouse by the fence, where the small black girl still lay curled up, knees to chest, clothes clinging wet and cold to her skin. Alexander Grant stepped out onto the veranda, dressed in a crisp white shirt and gray trousers, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. At 55, he was a man of strict order and immaculate routine. The sudden appearance of a child in his courtyard felt like a blot of ink on a canvas he demanded remain flawless. He ordered the butler to bring out a tray of scraps, what had once been meant for his hounds. Dry bread crusts, a few leftover slices of cured meat, a bowl of cold water. The butler looked puzzled, but Alexander gave only a curt lift of his chin. From a distance, Alexander watched as the tray was set down in front of the doghouse. The girl lifted her head, eyes downcast as if afraid to meet any gaze. Without a word, she crawled forward, snatched at the food with her hands, and devoured it hungrily. No thanks, no pleas. She ate as though it were a given, like a stray animal bowing to the bowl tossed its way. Alexander frowned. Something was wrong. In business, he had seen countless impostors, beggars who acted pitiful to exploit pity. But this girl, she was different. When one staff member tried calling out, "Hey, kid," she answered only with a low growl in her throat, eyes flashing with a feral wariness. The sound was so raw it unsettled even Alexander. Later, in his study, he picked up the phone and called his aide. His voice was clipped. "Lucas, find me a child psychologist. I need to know if this girl is faking or if something is truly wrong." "Do you think she's dangerous, sir?" Lucas asked cautiously. Alexander narrowed his eyes toward the lawn. "I don't believe in coincidence. A child shows up at my gate. No papers, no name. Could easily be a plant. But I won't make noise about it yet. Better to watch first." With that, he ended the call and returned to his laptop. Deals worth millions, contracts across Europe. Those demanded his attention far more than a stray child. The girl could wait. The day moved on in its usual rhythm. Meetings, receptions, signatures inked on papers. Only late that night, upon returning home, did Alexander remember her. As his car rolled into the driveway, he heard strange sounds from the garden. Not human, more like animals locked in struggle. He strode toward the noise. Under the garden lights, the scene made him freeze. The girl was locked in a tug-of-war over a bone with a large stray dog that had slipped in through the fence. Both growled in hoarse, guttural tones, fingers clawing the dirt, teeth bared and biting down on the bone with desperation. Mud streaked her tangled curls, her eyes gleamed wild and feral. Alexander stood stunned. No act, this child truly behaved like an animal. He rushed forward, seizing her shoulders and yanking her back. The dog barked furiously, snatched the bone and bolted into the night. But the girl still snarled, clawing at the ground as if she meant to chase it. "Enough. Stop this," he barked, shaking her. Her eyes flickered, then gradually softened as she recognized him. She panted hard, each breath rasping sharp in his ears. And then, from her soaked shirt, a piece of metal slipped free, clattering against the stone floor. Alexander bent down. It was a dog collar. The tag gleamed under the lights.
Lily, pet ID 3827.
Alexander froze, fingers tightening around the cold steel. A child carrying a dog's collar? He looked up. The girl's eyes darted away, frightened yet disturbingly resigned, as though to her the collar was normal. A chill slid down Alexander's spine. Every theory, con, plant, act, suddenly seemed hollow. Before him wasn't a schemer, but a living being twisted into something unspeakable. He stood silent, gripping the metal tag, shaken by a feeling he hadn't known in years, a mix of confusion, dread, and something disturbingly close to pity. Alexander Grant sat motionless in his study, the small collar still clenched in his hand, its frozen metal biting into his skin like a shard of steel. Outside, the girl lay curled in the kennel, her ragged breaths mingling with the hiss of the wind. In all his years after witnessing swindlers, frauds, and cutthroat tactics in business, Alexander had never seen anything so disturbing. A child with a dog collar, eating with her hands, growling like an animal. It was something he could not dismiss. He didn't wait for daylight. He picked up the phone and called Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a renowned child psychologist in New York. In her early 50s, with sharp features and keener eyes, she was known as the woman who could hear the hidden music in a child's cry. The line rang long before her steady, low voice answered. "Mr. Grant, it's nearly midnight. What could be so urgent?" Alexander glanced at the window. The storm had eased, thunder still rumbling in the distance. His reply was clipped. "I need you at my estate. A child, showing behaviors no child should. I need an emergency evaluation." A pause, then Eleanor agreed. An hour later, headlights cut across the wet courtyard. Eleanor appeared in a beige trench coat, briefcase in hand, fatigue etched in her face, but her eyes instantly sharpened as Alexander explained. They walked to the garden. Under the dim yellow light, the girl crouched in the kennel, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes burning with feral suspicion. When Eleanor approached, she growled, a guttural sound, nothing like a child. "I just want to talk." Eleanor murmured, voice soft as if soothing a newborn. But Lily, the name etched on the collar, snapped her jaw open and barked, each sound sharp before retreating deeper into the kennel. Eleanor turned to Alexander, frowning. After a few minutes of observation, she whispered, "This is not pretend. What you're seeing reflects a deeply disturbed identity. This girl has been conditioned to live as an animal. This isn't a ploy for sympathy." A chill rippled down Alexander's spine. For the first time in years, calculation gave way to something else. Back in the study, he sent a photo of the collar, Lily, pet ID 38027, to his old friend Samuel Price, a human rights activist and director of a children's advocacy nonprofit. Minutes later, Samuel's voice came through. Urgent. "Alexander, that's no pet code. ID 3827 is from our Second Chance adoption program. Every child has a unique ID. But here, someone added the word pet." Alexander's grip tightened. "You're saying this girl was placed in adoption?" "Yes. Her name is Lily. She was adopted 3 years ago by a white couple in the suburbs. I'll send you the files." "Alexander, if someone stamped pet on her collar, she wasn't seen as a daughter. She was treated as property." Samuel's voice carried restrained fury. Alexander said nothing. Veins taut on his hand. The next morning, Alexander, Eleanor, and Samuel drove to the listed address, posing as adoption inspectors. The house was suburban perfection. White siding, tidy lawn, picket fence. Margaret Collins, 35, opened the door. Hollow eyes, messy blonde hair, a smile stretched too thin. When they asked about Lily, she faltered. "Oh, that girl. She ran away. Ungrateful thing, I don't know where she is." Her evasive tone told Eleanor everything. In the backyard, Alexander froze. Against the wall stood a wooden doghouse. Beside it, a dented metal bowl. No dog in sight. Eleanor's eyes darkened. The puzzle was aligning. That afternoon, Samuel pulled Margaret's medical records. The truth hit like a blow. Postpartum psychosis, delusions, misassigning roles to those in her care. Her husband had died days before their child was born. Trauma shattered her mind. Yet she had still been allowed to keep Lily. Eleanor sighed heavily. She didn't see Lily as a daughter. She saw her as a dog. Everything, the growls, the obedience, the collar, its survival. Lily adapted to what was demanded of her. Alexander shut his eyes. The memory of the girl snarling over a bone burned into him. Neighbors confirmed the horror. They rarely saw Lily. Some heard scratching under the stairs at night, assumed it was a dog. One saw her barefoot on the porch in winter, crouched beside an empty bowl. An old woman whispered, "I once saw her crawling in the yard, with a bone in her mouth." Piece by piece, the nightmare unfolded. Lily had been confined, fed from bowls, punished into barking on command. No school, no toys, no loving words, only orders, shouts, and blows. Over time, Lily stopped seeing herself as human. To survive, she had become the only thing allowed, a dog. That evening, Alexander sat alone in his vast living room. The collar lay on the walnut table, its engraving cold and merciless. What chilled him more was the thought, if it hadn't rained that night, if he hadn't opened the door, if he'd driven her away, she would have vanished into the dark, and no one would ever have known. The image of her huddled in the kennel, eyes wide and vacant, growls trembling from her throat. It haunted him. For once, the ruthless businessman felt his heart pound with anger and pity. The answer was clear now. One night, driven by hunger, Lily crawled into the world looking for food, lost her way, and stumbled upon Alexander Grant's gates. The investigation began within days. All the evidence Alexander Grant had collected, the collar, the neighbors' testimonies, Margaret Collins' medical records, was handed over to the police. The interrogations were tense, and every time Lily had to face a uniformed officer, Alexander's chest tightened. The girl trembled at the sight of badges and dark uniforms. She pressed herself into a corner, eyes darting like a trapped animal. To get her to speak at all, Dr. Eleanor Hayes spent hours offering toys, wrapping her in gentle embraces, letting silence stretch until trust formed. Piece by piece, Lily's broken words spilled out, cutting through the room like blades. "I had to sit under the stairs, dark, cold. Had to eat from the metal bowl. If I didn't bark, she hit me. No one interrupted. Each syllable stripped away the illusion of civility society liked to cling to. Alexander sat in the corner, fists clenched, eyes shut. He could not fathom how, in the heart of a glittering city, a child had been reduced to an animal. The verdict was swift. Margaret Collins was guilty of severe child abuse. She was arrested, indicted, and the press erupted. Outrage roared across headlines. Yet for Alexander, none of that mattered more than the fragile life shivering in his estate. He applied for temporary guardianship of Lily. For the first time in his life, he signed a document that had nothing to do with profit or shares, only with a child. Just a few lines of text, but his hand shook as he wrote. Not even billion-dollar deals had ever made him feel this way. He hired Eleanor as Lily's long-term therapist and brought in a team of doctors to assess her health. One of his cold, cavernous guest rooms was transformed into a soft haven. Pale yellow sheets, a small bookshelf, stuffed animals waiting in the corners. The first days were heartbreaking. Lily crouched on the floor to eat, hands scooping food as if nothing else existed. When a servant offered her a spoon, she stared at it like an alien object, shook her head, even growled. Alexander often stood in the doorway, silent, his chest heavy. He had never been patient with anyone but numbers. But with Lily, he found himself unable to turn away. Meanwhile, Alexander pressed Samuel Price to launch a full audit of the adoption program that had failed Lily. At a press conference, facing cameras he usually despised, his voice rang out. When a child is placed in the wrong hands, they don't just lose childhood, they lose their humanity. Then he left the room reeling with one final declaration. No one has the right to put a collar on a child. Change came slowly, but it came. Lily's first step was small, hesitant hands holding a spoon, food slipping, eyes curious. Eleanor guided her gently. One day, instead of growling when called, Lily whispered, "I am Lily." Alexander overheard from the hallway. His throat tightened. A single self-introduction, but it broke something open inside him. Weeks later came her first laugh. Tentative at first, then brighter, unshackled. A sound that needed no permission. For the first time, Alexander saw her face lit by joy. He knew then he was on the right path. One afternoon, golden sunlight slanted across the carpet. Lily clutched a stuffed dog in her arms, the metal collar dangling from her fingers. Her eyes were distant, thoughtful. Then she slipped the collar around the toy and whispered, "I'm not a dog. I'm a person. I don't want it anymore. You can have it. I won't wear it again." Alexander froze at the door, chest aching. He turned away quickly, hiding eyes wet with tears. For the first time he understood. What he once dismissed as a ploy had been nothing but a mask for horrors deeper than he could imagine. Had he turned her away that night, she would have remained invisible, buried in silence. From then on, he changed. His speeches weren't only about profits. They carried warnings about invisible lives, children hidden in plain sight, suffering in houses that looked ordinary. Every donation he signed for child protection carried the memory of a little girl handing her collar to a stuffed dog. And Lily kept healing. She tried the bed, stumbled through her first words on paper, spelled haltingly but proudly. Each smile, each step forward, echoed like music through the halls of his once lifeless mansion. One night, Alexander stood at the window. Inside, Lily slept soundly, stuffed dog in her arms, the collar abandoned on the shelf. His voice was low, almost a vow to the darkness. "No child will ever wear a collar again. Not while I'm here." Message. The story of Lily and Alexander reminds us that in a world that calls itself civilized, there are still lives buried in darkness by neglect and cruelty. A child can be stripped of their humanity simply because adults forget that children need love, not to be treated like pets. And yet, from the awakening of a man once made of steel, we learn that sometimes a single act of concern, a single timely intervention, can save an entire life. No one has the right to put a collar on a child, because children are born to live as human beings, to be cherished and respected.